Thank you, Greta, and welcome everyone. My name is Ron Van Oorstrand, and I'm a Vietnam-era veteran and coordinator for Chapter 51 of Veterans for Peace. Veterans for Peace is a global organization of military veterans and allies with over 140 chapters worldwide. And our collective efforts are to build a culture of peace. We seek to inform the public of the true causes of war and the enormous costs of wars, with an obligation to heal the wounds of wars. And now, before we begin the program, I just want to make a land acknowledgement, and I encourage everyone, if you want to put in the chat, whose indigenous ancestral lands you may be joining us from. I'm joining today from Syracuse, New York, on the unceded land of the Onondaga Nation, a nation member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, land that was violently stolen by our settlist colonialist ancestors. And we must never forget that it was the, quote, revered, close quote, George Washington that issued the order in 1779 to lay waste to the land and the people of Onondaga Nation. Unfortunately for all of us, the Onondaga Nation survived that attempted total genocide. And if we could just remove our blinders, the blinders of profit and power, we might just have clear enough vision to be able to see the wisdom of our neighbors, in particular the great law of peace, when the nations of the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca joined to form the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. They did so under the great law of peace. They agreed to lay down their arms and to join in a confederacy guided by the principles of peace, unity, and democracy. And that is why we are committed to work in solidarity with the nation, Onondaga Nation, to protect their sovereignty and to continue to learn from them how to create a shared, sustainable future for all life. So our program, we have two featured speakers. Mattan Helman is the executive director of the Refusal Solidarity Network. He spent 110 days in prison because he refused to join the Israeli army and oppress Palestinians. And we also have Atalia Ben Abba. She's the social media manager for the Refusal Solidarity Network and manages the page at Voices Against War. She refused in 2017 and spent 110 days in military prison because she wanted to publicly condemn the Israeli occupation and not take part in its practices. We'll also hear from Israeli Conscientious Objectors Einat Gerlitz and Tal Mitnick, who are currently traveling across Canada for the Anti-Zionist Refusenik Speaking Tour throughout the month of March, and they're hosted by the Independent Jewish Voices in partnership with the Mesarvot Network. Let's begin the webinar with the basics, such as the mandatory draft in Israel. And I believe, Atalia, you are going to address this?
Yes. Hello. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for joining. I think to start to understand this topic of conscientious objectors in Israel, it's important to know that there is mandatory conscription in Israel, both for men and women. This conscription-based service is something that has some exceptions. There are exceptions for Palestinians people, for ultra-Orthodox people, and there are also ways of legally avoiding conscription, mostly through mental health or physical health committees, and also through a conscious committee. which is a committee that is internal to the military. So it really works on these like strict, very clear ideas of what is considered a conscientious objector, mainly it's pacifism. Anyone who is like very overtly political with their reasons for refusing to serve usually will not be exempt by this committee. Men are required to serve 32 months and women are required to serve 24 months. And the first draft notice is usually sent to teens while they're 17. And at this age in high school, they already start talking about military conscription. They go to like a week-long boot camp trial, and the whole culture around the military is like, this is what everybody does, this is what you have to do, this is how you become part of Israeli society, and it's a very, very militarized society. I think that covers most of it.
You're saying that this is at the age of 17. So what level of knowledge, education do most people have at that time in terms of what is being done to the Palestinians?
I think none. Like it's the historical narrative about Palestine is that this was like an empty land and this was a refuge for Jewish people, and there is almost no space for Jewish teens and Palestinian teens to get to know each other, to learn about the different lives they lead, to learn that there are people living and trying to create life here, people that have been oppressed, people that their land has been stolen. There's almost like no way for Israeli teenagers to know that there is an occupation, because it's very much silenced through media, and in the past years, even like since I refused, the media in Israel has become even more extreme and more like fascist in the views that it produces. And we see channels like Channels 14 that are like very explicitly political, very right-wing, and very much push this belief that this land is like a land that was given to Jewish people by God.
And when you say that they go high school graduates go to like boot camp in terms of understanding their military conscription, are they at that time? Is it explained to them at that time about conscientious objection?
No, it's not even acknowledged as an option. Like there is no option of like you don't have to in this, or it's political choice or a moral choice. It's like a lot of people know that civil service is an option, but they have no idea that, for example, in order to do civil service, you first have to get an exemption. You can't just declare that you would rather to do civil service. You have to get an exemption. And so people don't even know that. So even like just starting to think about, how can this be more of a choice is not something that people have access to. And in the school, you constantly see soldiers, and in the street, you constantly see soldiers, and in your family, you constantly see soldiers. So it's so ingrained in the culture that it's really hard to imagine for someone to not be a soldier themselves.
Okay. Well, Mattan, could you please explain or share your story? What led you to refuse, your experiences, how you came to the political consciousness to actually refuse?
Yes, First of all, thanks for having me and thanks for everyone to join. Um, so I was born in a kibbutz, which is a kind of a socialist village. Um, and this socialist village, I grew up in values of solidarity, socialism, and also Zionism, because it's very, like, the story of kibbutzes in Israel, it's like we are the ones who build the country. So they're very also militaristic, by the same, and Zionist, by the same time, socialist, and a lot about solidarity between people and nations. So that's the values that I grew up. But I also born as a non-Jewish person in Israel. My father is a Jew and my mother is not. So according to the Israeli state, I'm not considered as a Jew. And because of that, like, I start to see my society a bit more critically, because Israel, it's all about the home of the Jewish people, and I understood that it's the home of the Jewish people, so I'm as non-Jewish person, so I felt a bit more like left out and being seen different, although many people didn't know that I'm not Jewish. Um, so I took Zionism and also my society a bit more critically. But I didn't know like what happened in the West Bank and what happened with the Palestinians, because we don't talk about it. We didn't hear anything. Actually, the first time I heard about the occupation, the Israeli occupation, was when I was 15 in the youth movement that I was part of. And that's the first time that they told us the Israeli army oppressed the Palestinians. We occupy land that is literally like 20 kilometers from where I live. Like, it's very close, and I didn't know that it even exists. So just showing like how much Israelis don't know. And like me, only when I was 15 to hear about it for the first time. So I was very much in shock. Like, my brother, my father, everyone were soldiers, everyone that I knew, and many of them are combat soldiers. And I didn't know that's what they did, or part of what they did. And so I was like very in shock, and I was interested to learn more about it, because how I didn't know about it. And I hear the testimonies of soldiers that say what they did in the West Bank, and the occupation that they did and the jobs they did there. And like, when I read more and I heard more, I understood that I don't want to be part of it. I don't want to like oppress Palestinians. Like, I grew up in, as I said, like, about solidarity and socialism. So how those values not come in also when it's regarding for Palestinians. So I see them like as me, like I will not go oppress anyone, so why I will oppress other people and them. So I decided I don't want to be part of the army, but as Atalia said, we don't know what, like, there's nothing that say, oh, you can be a conscientious objector, or what can you do? So I was very much clueless that time. I kind of was very confused, okay, what I'm actually going to do. And then it was 2014. There was another war in Gaza back then. I don't remember the name of it. And then there was two refusers, and that actually spoke about it publicly. And by them, I heard about the idea of refusing, of like speak about it, not only not to go to the army, but speak about it publicly and trying by that to make an influence and change people's opinion. And also that the idea that they went actually to prison because of that. So when I was 16, I decided that's what I want to do. I want to be like them. I want to not only not to take part of the occupation, but also try to use my voice and try to change other people to do a similar action or the same action, but take a stand against the occupation. But like still I had like around 4 years, because I had my conscription, my draft time only when I was 20. And during that time, I also joined a group of refusers, which is called Mesarvot. Einat and Tal are from here. And I joined actually via Atalia's protest. That was like a protest in front of prison. And I went to this protest to support Atalia. And this is actually how I joined the organization. Also before that, like I had a lot of conflicts with people because, of course, many people don't agree with what I did with my actions, and they say even though there's occupation, it's still you have to go to the army. It's what you should do. And I had a lot of conflict with my parents in the beginning, and later they more understood. But also, I did like a service year in the youth movement that I was part of. And for example, because I decided to refuse, and they knew that they decided after a while to actually kick me out of the youth movement, and they actually even had a vote for that. Even though like I lived in a commune with those people for like a year. So it just show like how much is important in Israeli society, like the idea of going to the army and the consequences that happen when you're not actually going to the army. And then after that, I refused, and I spent basically 110 days in prison, and which was 5 different times that I went to prison, because they sent you for like around 20 days to prison when you first time refuse. And then when you're going out from prison, they give you a letter to go into the enlisting base and to enlist. And then you go to the enlisting base, and there you again refuse, and again they send you to prison. And it's like a cycle that officially there's no ends for it. And there's no like when it should stop or how many days you need to be in prison in order to be released from the army. But for me, it went to 110 days in prison.
And Mattan, this is in a military prison?
Yes. When you're like the law of the conscription to the army, it's basically a military law. So you consider kind of a soldier already, even though you didn't join the army. And it's considered like you break in like a command from your commander to enlist. So they send you to a military prison, which there most of the prisoners are people that all don't want to be in the army for many different reasons. Like it could be economical reasons, like a lot of people who need to work for their families and they don't have enough money and their families, so they prefer to go to work instead of going to the army, and many times they're going to prison because of that. Or like people who don't want the jobs that they got in the army, and they trying to change it by be like a bad soldier. You can say.
Well, thank you, Mattan. Natalia, would you share your story?
Yes. So I'm originally from Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and I grew up like really on the border between like the Palestinian part of Jerusalem and the Israeli part of Jerusalem. So I had a lot of like familiarity with Palestinian people, and also with what like military oppression looks like. Like on my day to day, I would see, like soldiers stopping people in the street for like body searches and things like that. And I also grew up seeing how much worse it got, because it was this time of like building the separation wall and bringing more like military into the old city, and so I really saw how Palestinian lives changed because of like the increase of military oppression. And so actually from a pretty young age, I knew that there was an occupation, and also I was very lucky to have my older brother influence me and sort of tell me about it, and like insist on taking me to demonstrations in neighborhoods in Palestinian Jerusalem, and taking me to like tours of the West Bank, and he himself didn't enlist, and for me that really legitimized the idea of not enlisting myself. But I was in the same youth movement as Mattan, and these youth movements are like also like socialist and like have very good values, but they're also very much Zionist, and they put a lot of emphasis on enlisting to the military and enlisting together. So I also did this year of like living together as a commune after you finish high school and like doing educational work. And we had these seminars meant to encourage us to enlist to the military together and to like these like specific units. And they really pushed the idea of like changing the system from within and being the good soldier and having like trying to influence society with your morality and not having like only doing something that you think is the right thing to do, doing something that you think is right for the entire society and could influence the entire society, but doing that as like a soldier. And for me, it was like really, I think the big question of like, okay, I don't believe I can change this system from within. Like I know what, what the occupation looks like. I know that a checkpoint is a checkpoint, even if you're like being nice at the checkpoint. I know what it does to the lives of people who have to, spend 4 hours just like going through a checkpoint every day. But I do want to do this like thing that could be meaningful for my entire society and could influence society. So discovering the option of refusal and doing it publicly and making a public statement with this like very clear statement of I will not enlist to be a part of this oppressive military. For me was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I also already knew Mattan, who actually decided to refuse before me, but because he's younger, I got the honor of refusing first. But like talking with him and talking with someone who also wanted to do the same thing and was the same youth movement as I was like really meaningful in making this thing that really seems absurd. It seems like impossible, but talking to him made it seem possible. And then I got in contact with the Mesarvot Network and got to know like other refusers and made this thing more like real and possible for me. And then as Mattan, I refused to enlist. I was sentenced for a month. I got released. I was sentenced again and had this like cycle, which concluded in like 4 months of military prison.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the history of the Refuser Solidarity Network.
Yes, I can
Mattan?
take.
Okay.
I think it would be good. Maybe I will speak about the history in general of the refuser movement, and then I will go to Refuser Solidarity Network. So the refuser movement, it started, I can say, from the beginning, basically, of the country, like already in the Nakba, in the Israeli independence war, how in Israel we call it. Already there was a couple of people refused to do some orders and to take part of the Nakba and fight against the Palestinians. But it was not really organized as much. And we can see that start to be a bit more frequent amount of refusers, and also it started to be a bit more organized when actually the occupation started. Like then it started to be like the first letter of actually people of younger teenagers who say they're not going to the army because of the Israeli occupation and what it will do to the Israeli society and also to the Palestinians. But it was not as much still organized as much. And I feel like the main big change started in the first Lebanon war. Like Israel fight against Lebanon, and it was mostly against organizations Lebanon, and start to do like occupied basically south of Lebanon from the 80s till the beginning of the 2000s, if I remember correctly. And there was like start to be like a big movement which called Yesh Gvul, which was a movement mostly of reserve soldiers based. Like there was a lot of reserve soldiers that decide they're not going to be part of the fights in Lebanon and to take part of the Israeli occupation of South Lebanon. And it started to be like really a movement which was quite big. Like they had like kind of a Woodstock even event that major singer of Israel came there. There was like thousands of people go there. And they actually got kind of a lot of support from the Israeli public because the war in Lebanon was not very popular inside of Israel. And also there was quite a lot of refusers, like we're talking about thousands of reserve soldiers and soldiers that refused back then, and around 200 went to prison. So that's when the act of refusing start to be organized, and also it start to like make the actual change, which in the end it's one of the main things that end the Lebanon war and the withdrawal of the Israeli army from south of Lebanon. And another turning point of the movement in general, and also it's when RSN started after that, it's the second Intifada, which was the beginning of the 2000s. Then there was like a big major refusal wave. There was also a big refusal wave of reserve soldiers that back then they called themselves Ometz Lesarev, which is bravery to refuse. I'll translate from Hebrew. And also there was a lot of teenagers that decided they would not go to the Israeli army because of the Israeli occupation and what they did in the Second Intifada in the West Bank. And this movement, like it's one of the first time as well that Israel kind of withdraw the army from occupied land. That's one of the reasons why the Israeli army withdrew from Gaza, and also they removed some settlements in the West Bank, which they never did that before. And like I don't remember the person's name, but one of the main administration from the Israeli prime minister back then said that one of the main reasons why the withdrawal happened, it's because the refusers, because like they didn't have enough actually soldiers, and they didn't have enough people to carry on the fights in the Second Intifada. So, and they didn't have enough people to continue the occupation there. So that actually showed really the power of the refusing and what it can do, that it actually can cause even withdrawal of the Israeli army from the occupation. And that's show like it actually can end also the occupation, because of course, if there is no soldiers to carry on the occupation, and there's not going to be occupation. And the Second Intifada, it was also a time that Refusal Solidarity Network been established. And that was exactly the time, because there was such a big wave of refusal. They understood that in the movement there is kind of a problem. There was like a meeting with some American Jewish people in America, and they were saying like, why actually nobody hear them in the international community? Why nobody knows it? And also another issue that raised that there was such a big, so many people refused, there's not enough support to those refusers, because in Israeli society, people will not support people who refuse. Like it's such a taboo and such a something that people condemn, and so there'll not be enough support. So because of that, we decided to create basically an organization, which now it's Refusal Solidarity Network, that will help to amplify the voices of the refusers internationally, so people all over the world can hear it. Yeah, because that was an issue. Because also what's important to know that how you will speak to the Israeli media, it's a bit different than what you speak to internationals. Because you want in the end that in the Israeli media that people will do the same. So they need to resonate and they need to understand why you're doing it and to trying to get their support and do similar actions. So you need to do like something that will like a message that resonates with them. And you cannot maybe say, for example, if there are someone who an anarchist or someone with a more communist, so many times they will try to say stuff that still most people will understand the reasons, and so it will be like a bit bigger support to them. But for the internationals, they are more understanding why people do it. They understand that there is an occupation and they understand what's happening. So it's a different messaging that need to do. So there's like basically different messages. And of course, the refusers in Israel were always historically more interested to do impact inside of Israel and less impact outside. But it's also super important to amplify them internationally. So the impact will also happen in the international. So that's one thing. And the other thing is to have a place to like create an international base of support that can sustain the movement and can support the refuser and the movement itself in Israel. So that's how Refuser Solidarity, about those two ideas, Refuser Solidarity Network been established. So to amplifying the voices of the refusers, because that's why they went to prison. They went to prison in order to people listen to them and to make an impact by their voice. So to help them to do that and to try to provide support for the refusers themselves, mostly the organizations and the movement itself. So that's what we are doing, and we are doing it like in many different ways. If it's by amplification, as we said, mental support, providing finance to the organizations, and also to see sometimes which void there is inside the movement, like what is missing in the movement in order to make more impact and also to create more support. So that's what we are trying sometimes to find, then to make it happen, that to fill this void with, if it's a new initiative or a new organization, to help them to emerge, basically to fill those voids. That's also about how we feel Solidarity Network, but a bit more recent history about the impact of the action of refusal. Before the 7th of October, which I'm sure we're going to talk about it a bit later. So there was actually the first time that was used this tactic of refusal for social change, part of something that it's not about occupation. There was trying to change laws in Israel, like the Prime Minister Netanyahu tried to change some laws in order to make Israel not democratic even for Jewish people. And a lot of reserve soldiers say that they will actually refuse if they will continue with to push those laws. And also the huge amount of people who refuse actually caused them to stop those laws. They didn't continue with it. So it's again showing how much is powerful those actions of refusing, not only for ending the occupation, but also for other social change.
And has the network's work changed at all in response to the war that broke out in 2023 and the genocide in Gaza?
Yes. I thought maybe before that to explain a bit more about the refusal as a tactic, if it's okay. Atalia, can you talk about that part?
Yes, I think like it's important to us to sort of, emphasize this idea that refusal has the power to create change, and especially in such a militarized society where so much of the state's power relies on the soldiers. this act of destabilizing the military can really change the actions of the state. And this idea of protest has been very powerful in Israeli society for the past few years, but we believe that protests by themselves are not enough, and that the power that refusal offers is extremely valuable. And we see how scared Israeli politicians are from refusal. Whenever there is a resurgence of refusers and refusal letters, which are like a tactic that for the past 10 years has been very influential in the refuser movement, having these like big letters with a lot of people signing the letters, even if not all of them would publicly refuse. They really sort of make the politician in Israel nervous, and they often react very aggressively towards them.
Actually, I would like to add to what Atalia said. Like, we need to sometimes remember when, like, for example, the occupation or everything that the government do in Israel all over the world, it's because people kind of give permission to that. They kind of give consent for it. If it's via like the tax that we provide to the government, is it via doing it by ourselves? But we are going with the status quo. And the idea of refusing, it's you kind of withdraw this cooperation from the state. Like basically, as we said that if there are no soldiers, the occupation cannot happen. If there's no soldiers, cannot be a genocide in Gaza, because they need soldiers in order to do that. And the less soldiers they have less ability to carry that on. So that's one of the power of refusal. It's basically to withdraw this cooperation and reduce the ability of the government to continue on of what they are doing. And also the second thing, it's about the voice that, like the voice of the refusers. That there is something about, like when you refuse and people like went to prison, so like there's a lot of negative consequences that we receive from that, and receiving a lot of negative consequences and with our voice, I'm trying to say it good with my English, but it's actually helped to inspire people and to move people to actions. That's why it's so important, the amplification, and that people hear about refusers and what they are doing. And that's why it's so important for them to be heard, because that makes people to be inspired to take actions, even if it's Israelis. Like for me, I heard about someone who refused, and that's inspired me to refuse by myself and to be an activist and to do active things against the occupation. Also, Atalia said the same thing, but also for internationals to take actions, if it's action of support for the refusers or actions against the occupation that many countries in the world in some ways support it and cooperate with it. For example, the US who provide a lot of weapons to Israel, which is also help Israel to continue the occupation. So yeah, that's the main two power of things that refusing do. Just to add of what Talia said already.
Well, thank you. Let's now hear from the Anti-Zionist Refusenik Speaking Tour participants, Einat Gerlitz and Tom Mitnick. Would you like to briefly tell us about why and where you are and how we might follow you?
Hi, so we're happy to be here. I'm Einat. This is Tal.
Hello.
We're here in Canada right now. We're in Guelph. We're doing a speaking tour around the country where we have 13 stops all over the country. And we're like, you can follow IJV to have information about all the events. International Jewish Voices, those are the ones who invited us here. And we're going all over Canada, sharing our stories of refusal, and creating these strong and important connections with the activists over here.
We believe that change should come both from the inside and from the outside. Us as Israelis, our role in our society, our role as Israeli Jews, is to affect Israeli society. And coming here, we want to support and encourage people to influence their society and the way that their society is enforcing and is taking part in the genocide that we're seeing in the Gaza Strip. This is the Canadian and American and European without those weapons, the genocide would not be possible. So we urge the people that are listening, the people that come to hear us, to pressure their governments, to pressure their local municipalities to divest from Israeli-made products, to put in an arms embargo on the Israeli state, and to stop the genocide.
Well, thank you both, and safe travels to you.
Thank you.
Greta, I believe we might have some questions.
Yeah, we have tons of questions coming in, and I invite all of our speakers to chime in. Just unmute if you'd like to respond to a question. We'll try to fit in as many as possible. Also, any of our speakers, you're welcome to take a look in the Q&A box and type in a written answer. If there's something that particularly compels you, you can type in a written answer, and that way we can try to answer as many as possible. So one of the questions that came in, and again, anyone please feel free to speak to this, is if you could speak a little bit more about what the conditions were like in the prison itself.
So I think there's a big difference in the conditions between, I think it's maybe important to say that we were kept in a military prison for soldiers, or ones who refuse to be soldiers, and the Palestinians are kept in different military prisons. They're kept in inhumane conditions, facing torture. Our conditions were relatively okay. It was a tough experience, but it's important to differentiate between those two. And I think there's also a very big difference in the environment inside of the prison before and after October 7th. I refused in 2022, and Tal was the first public refuser after October 7th.
The environment in the prison is one of we didn't really talk about what happened to Israeli society after October 7th. We didn't talk about the switch in the mindset, the idea of abandoning the hand to peace. And it hit a lot of Israelis in the fact that maybe before that they were open to the idea of peace. Now a lot of them are totally for destruction and killing. And inside the prison, it especially was very, very clear. Talking to other prisoners, it was hard to get past a first sentence of why you're here, what are you doing here, without talking about our political opinions. And with me, I did it in a way where I tried to form personal connections with the other prisoners. I tried to talk to them about personal life and other things. And after I formed these personal connections, I could tell them why and what I'm doing here. And I found that way, the people were actually more empathetic to what I was talking about. And also, it created this connection where these people come in, they hate Palestinians and they hate leftists. And when they're going to go out, they're going to go sit there with their friends, maybe have a few beers, and they're going to maybe bring up the subject of politics and how much their friends hate leftists. And this guy would maybe say, oh, I hate leftists too, but there is this one guy that I sat in prison with. So I feel like these things do make a difference in the way that people perceive what being a leftist in Palestine actually is. And I want to add that there have been cases recently in military prison where speaking up and talking about politics has gotten people sent to solitary confinement. Itamar Greenberg, our last refuser, who was just released less than a week ago, he talked about politics and he was not very secretive about it. There were a lot of people that argued with him, and used. It was almost a situation of physical violence. So instead of the prison guards putting down those who were using physical violence, they took him away and put him in solitary confinement.
I want to add actually to what Tal said about 18 leftists. Like many people, or at least from my experience in prison, they don't even know exactly what does it mean to be a lefty. Like for me, I had a conversation with someone who asked about my opinion, and I talked about it, that I'm against occupation. And then you say, oh, you're left, so you want to kill all the Jewish people. And I'm like, no, I don't want to kill all the Jewish people. Like, I want everyone to be like free, no oppressed, and safe, like freedom for everyone. And then it's like, ah, okay, so you're not right wing, so you don't want to kill all the Palestinians, but also you don't want to kill all the Jewish people. So you're in the middle, like you want everyone to be in peace. So this sometimes there's a lot of misunderstanding of what is it to be left and to be against occupation in Israel.
Thank you. And moving us on to the next question, there was sort of the cycle of imprisonment that Atalia and Mattan both talked about, being imprisoned, being released, being imprisoned again. So there was a question of how does that cycle end? Eventually, is it when you turn a certain age, or when do they stop trying to conscript you?
It's a good question. We don't know exactly what's the reason why it ends. In my case, there is an option after 90 days of prison to go to like a fitness committee. It's like if you're fit to the army. And there I basically got exception not to be in the army and because of my seriously bad behavior, which is reasons of many other refusers. I think that Aliyah got the same exemption and a lot of others. But yeah, for example, now I don't remember how much Itamar was in prison, the last refuser, but it was much longer than 110 days. I think it was around 190 days. Einat and Tal, correct me if I'm wrong.
195, yes.
95. So it is changed for many different reasons. And it's after the October 7th, they're going for longer time in prison. That's what we saw till now. I hope it's answering the question.
Yeah, and of course there are many, many questions coming in along the lines of, has the proportion of people refusing increased after October 7th? And also, is there more awareness among the general population in Israel about, the war crimes, the genocide, the refusers? Yeah, can any of you speak to that?
What we mainly see with Israeli society since October 7 is, like Tal explained, is a really growth in like this very genocidal language. So a lot of the people seeing the war crimes committed by Israel are not so much ashamed by them. They either deny them or they accept them as something that we have to do, or even more people are just insistent on this idea that the Palestinian people should be all exterminated. So it has become really, really difficult to speak against the genocide in Gaza and even acknowledge it as a genocide, to acknowledge the occupation, to acknowledge the actions being committed in the West Bank. We saw it also in the reaction to the film by Valen Basel that was like treated as like an act of terrorism. So we have been making a lot of efforts to try to influence and to show that there are other ways of thinking and speaking, and to show that there is resistance from within, to show anti-Zionist resistance from within. And what I do in the project of Voices Against War is I try to amplify the voices of people in Israel, Palestine who resist occupation and resist the genocide, who go out and demonstrate, who do direct actions, who refuse. And we've been putting a lot of effort into trying to show that we exist here inside, because we also want to show that, you know, resistance to the occupation and to the genocide is not anti-Semitism. It's something that we have to do if we want to create a future here in this land.
Yes, I can also add on that. Something about refusing in general, that many times it takes time till people get the courage and also go beyond the justification of the war to refuse. Like we see that it's not starting immediately most of the time. People don't immediately start a war and there's a lot of refusal. It takes time till it starts people to understand what is actually happening. And the same thing we saw in the October 7th. Like in the beginning of, it was like people in Israel see it as like very justified war, and it's very justified to attack Palestine, and that's how it starts. And we as like Refusal Solidarity Network, we understood that it's going to be in the future, like there'll be a big wave of refusers, also because that's how it's historically happens, but also the amount of crimes and the genocide that happened, we knew that it will work up people eventually, and people will start to refuse. But we also know that it's not come from nowhere, like refusing. Like the same as I got to refuse, that I heard about it from other people that did it, and the same as Atalia. We need kind of a organization that put it always in the media. And there is already for the young conscientious objector, but there's not as much organization who try to do that for reserve soldiers. And when I'm talking about reserve soldiers, like you need to understand, it's like we are talking about around 300,000 people. It's mass amount of people that actually being reserve soldiers from the October 7th. So together, like with other refusers from the Second Intifada, there were reserve soldiers who refused back then. We kind of helped them to create an organization called Anisirafti, which is I Refused. This organization, all the idea of it was to create videos of those reserve soldiers that refused in the past, to say why they refused in the past and why they refuse again if they will be called, and to make people to understand there is another option and they can do that, because this is how it spread, the idea of refusing. It like needs to be heard about it and get the courage to do that and get the support in order to do that. So after that's been established, and there were a couple of videos that we did like a campaign on it. It's like a couple of months after that, there was a letter that of 40 reserve soldiers that were in Gaza or were joined back to the army when the war started, that they say that they will refuse to take part of the war anymore. They're not going to do that anymore. And they got support from Anisirafti to have it. So this organization support them to do their campaign and to being published. And that's after that even increased and showed that how much is like a snowball sometimes. That in the last September, there was a new letter that was more than 200 people of reserve soldiers that now refusing. And something that is interesting that this group of reserve soldiers do, they call themselves soldiers for the hostages. One of the main justification of the war in Israel, we are going to the war because to release the hostages, the Israeli hostages, they mean. And basically they trying to use that and to make people to realize that actually the war not only killing and murdering a lot of Palestinians, but also killing the hostages themselves. The main reason why most of Israelis joined the war, one of the main reasons. So it's also resonates with a lot of Israelis, so it make people easier to change their mind because it resonates with them. But also it gives people a platform to join and refuse without and live kind of less, make it easier for them because it's not talking about, oh, the Palestinians and the suffer they have. So it's easier for many Israelis to join for that call, although they still can have like the anti-occupation and the anti-genocide of what happened, but it's easier publicly to speak about the hostages, so it's increasing the amount of refusals. And the power of it, we actually saw now that there's a ceasefire. So one of the reasons of the ceasefire is because Israel don't have enough soldiers at the moment to carry on the war. So they actually need a break to bring back the soldiers. So yeah, that's actually show how much powerful it is and how much it worked.
Thank you. And I know we are running out of time, but I hope that we can go a little bit over time to answer a few more questions. And there have been so many excellent questions coming in, so I encourage everyone to follow up with our speakers and their organizations, and we can send a follow-up email with information about both organizations and how people can continue to engage. But I'd love to hear a little bit more from Einat and Tal, because there's been a few questions that have come in to explain what exactly is the difference between the two organizations, Mesarvot and the Refuser Solidarity Network. So maybe you could speak a little bit more about the difference between them, or what you do in particular.
Mesarvot is a network of Israeli conscientious objectors. We offer crucial legal support for the refusers throughout the process. I could say for myself, it was really impactful to know that I always had a lawyer rooting for me and sending letters for me and talking to the army for me, to know that I'm not alone in this. And another aspect of not being alone is the social network that Mesarvot creates. It's a group of young people that talk about their opinions and criticize the state of beings that exists right now in the land.
And initiate political events together too.
And for me, someone that comes from a very privileged background, that my parents support me, it's impactful, but it's even more impactful for those refusers who risk cutting contact with their friends, their family, the places that they know. And Mesarvot offers a home for those people.
And Refuser Solidarity Network, we are more like, I would say, the international wing of the movement. We're basically amplifying the voices of refusers and also of other organizations in the movement, because it's important to know there's much more, like another 4 or 5 organizations in the movement. There's a New Profile that actually one of the founders of New Profile is here today, Ruti Hiller. And she actually, I saw her writing in the chat. She's also from my kibbutz, by the way. So New Profile help people who don't want to be in the army, but not necessarily want to go to prison. And so we support them as well, and we amplify their voices too. And there's Urfud, which is a Druze-based. Druze is like I don't know how to say, but it's kind of a religion in Israel. It's one of the religions, and people. So they also, some of them refuse because they see themselves as Palestinians and not Israelis. So we also support that. And there's a lot of different organizations. And through the Solidarity Network support all of them, where we support all the movement and we provide them support in many different ways. It very depends what the different organization needs. All of them we provide funding, but we also provide amplification, as we said, strategic planning sometimes. So we have meeting and we think with them how to strategize, also to build some of their capacities, but also in general, we are looking at it as a movement. So we are there for them, doesn't matter what, and for the long term. And so we kind of make it sustainable, but also we're looking for what is the voids in the movement, how to make it better, or what needs to be built. So we help into initiatives that make to fill those voids to make it to happen. So one of them, for example, we talk about Anisi Rafti and the soldier for hostages, and we also created not long ago also a mental support for refusers, because yes, going to prison and experience all the hateness, it can be also very hard to refusers, and yeah, they also need to support for that.
Thank you. So this is a huge question and one could really, warrant obviously its own webinar. But there have been several questions and comments coming in along the lines of, what is the future that your organizations envision? What is the anti-Zionist future that you envision? Do your organizations have a position, for example, on a two-state solution, or again, I know that's a huge can of worms question, but any thoughts about that?
I think because we're a refuser organization, this is less, this is less the political vision that we offer. I can speak for myself, less for the organization or for the network. I support a one-state solution. I think it's crucial to acknowledge the Nakba and the fact that Palestine is the entire land. It's not the 48 borders or the 67 borders. And I think it's also crucial to acknowledge the Palestinian right of return. The way I view it, the only solution that provides an answer to these two very crucial points is a one-state solution.
Yes, I want to add that the refusal as a movement, so there is a lot of, it's like contain a lot of different opinions and beliefs, and what made them together, basically it's the tactic that removed the cooperation and forcing Israel to end occupation because they will not be able to do it. So there's like from more left Zionists that see that we need to end the occupation and two-state solution and that's it, but there's also more communist and anarchists that will be one-state solution, or even there's like a federation idea. So it's contained of a lot of different opinion about the end goal, but all of them have the same kind of tactic and the same idea of like what we need to do is to push in order to end what is happening now, and the genocide, and the occupation, and the apartheid that is inside of Israel. And that's what we should push to, like about ending it. And I think solutions, yeah, there's many different solutions and everyone has their own. So.
Einat and Tal, did you want to say anything about this?
I think Talia and Mattan covered it very well. Also at Mesarvot, we don't have official position. We all have our own kind of visions and strategies on what's right, and we support every refuser in amplifying his voice or his or her voice in their opinion.
There's another question about, are you working more with pro-Palestinian groups abroad in a more coordinated and structured way? I guess like post October 7th, has that coordination increased in any way?
Yes, it's very crucial for us as like through the work that we do to cooperate with international groups. We are currently working on a campaign together with If Not Now, which is a Jewish organization working in the US, trying to, we're working on a campaign for a weapons embargo petition. That we also cooperate with organizations in Europe, like Another Europe is Possible on. And I can say, like, specifically on social media, we cooperate a lot, trying to have like this like international network of groups working together. So it also happens within, like a lot of the amplification that I do is not necessarily for refusal, it's for any form of resistance. So I work like within the social media groups of the activists who do protective presence in the West Bank, and with groups that do protests and direct actions in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv and in Haifa, and also the same thing internationally with groups like Academics for Peace, or even like we had some cooperations with Jewish Voice for Peace, and obviously we have this cooperation.
Okay, well, I know that we are over time, so I want to respect everyone's time and wrap us up. Again, we will send out a follow-up email with the recording, and we'll include links to both of your organizations so that people can follow up and continue to be engaged. But before we close out, just to any of our speakers, any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
I want you to say it's a final thought, but I want just to say thank you everyone that came. And I think like my main like something that I think the most important, I think I think also Talia and Einat and Tal will agree with me that what for us as refusers the most important is like the impact of what we are doing. Like I remember while I was in prison, the most thing that I wanted to do is that people will hear about what I'm saying and will hear that I'm here. Not in a sense like I want to people, you know, like the self-fame or something like that, but it's more I want to create as much impact to inspire other people to take actions and do something and to know there is Israeli occupation, we have to end it. There is Israeli genocide and we also have to end it. And that's the most important. It's like, so like I want, it would be like amazing that you like take it from here, what you heard today, and take as much actions back at home and talk about the refusers in your community and family, and to inspire them to take actions as well. And thank you very much also for everyone that's here.
I would like to add before we finish that first, like, of course, thank you for everyone who was here today. And there's a new refuser who is going to refuse in 3 days, Ella Kedar Greenberg. She's a dear activist. She's a very brave trans woman. She's 18 years old. She is going to refuse on March 19th to enlist to the military. We do not know in what conditions she will be held and what kind of sentence she will get. And we ask you all to follow her story and to share it. And in these times of uncertainty, we need the international support more than ever.
Thank you. And where can we follow that story? Would that be through Mesarvot?
Yeah,
Okay.
it will be through Mesarvot.
Okay.
Yes, you can hear all of the about the refuser movement in Mesarvot and also in RSM.
Okay, we'll be sure to collect, I'll follow up with you. We'll be sure to collect those links and put them in the follow-up email for everyone. So thank you again, everyone. This has been a really powerful webinar. I'm seeing a lot of comments coming in from the chat that people are just thankful that a lot of them did not know about this. It's so important to tell these stories and to share this. So I will pass it to Ron, our moderator, for any final words to close us out.
Well, I just want to thank all of the speakers. And just share with you that it's very inspiring to see what you're doing. And we've got a lot of work to do here to support you, and we will continue to do that in any way that we can. And thanks again to World Beyond War for hosting and facilitating this.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're located. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.